Today I'm pretty excited because I'm going to be playing loose and fast with the boundaries of health and safety, unleashing the power tools, trying to create my own DIY ramp extension. I recently had a lot of fun tarting up my ramp, putting on an extra lick of paint, and whilst I was going through that process, I mused on the idea of adding an extension. I thought an extension would add an extra bit of zip and also provide a bit of a challenge when learning tricks, helping smooth the transition between learning tricks on my smaller ramp and taking them out into the wild onto the bigger transitions. I couldn't decide the best part of the ramp to put this extension. I also didn't want to mess with the ramp permanently because I really like it the way it is. So that led me to the idea of trying to design a movable extension I could place anywhere on the ramp. So I came up with a basic conceptual design. My ramp's just under 3 foot tall, so I thought a 1 foot extension would bring it up into the 4 foot territory and provide a nice challenge. As I intended the extension to be movable and also be stored in the garage, it would need to be fairly small. As my ramp is pool inspired in design, it seemed churlish not to try and source a bit of real pool coping to go on the top of this extension. And by lucky hap, my mate Richie had a piece which he kindly donated. This pool coping block started life in a swimming pool and then was used for a DIY backyard mini ramp. So I was pretty confident that it was going to work a treat for my little extension. I gave this coping block a good clean up and a fresh spray of lacquer so she was ready to go. This coping block is 2 foot wide, that's 60 centimetres, and 1 foot deep. So I let those dimensions start to inform the design of my extension box. I also let the sizes my materials were available in dictate some of the dimensions. So for instance, a 2.4 length of 2x4 would make 3 80 centimetre beams. So I thought if I just had an 80 centimetre width, that'd leave 10 centimetres over either side of the coping block to allow me to get onto stools a little bit easier. I also decided on a 1 foot height because I could rip that out of a 2 foot wide piece of 18mm plywood, which is what I'd use for the sides of the box and the transition shape. Lastly, I wanted to make sure that the board could deck out on a rock fakie with the wheels up against the coping, so I measured how long that would be to make sure my deck extended past the 1 foot of the coping block. To get on and off of the extension, I knew that I'd have to smooth over the coping, so I came up with a design where I had one lip of 9mm plywood going over the coping, sitting down on the surface of the ramp, and then a 1mm thick strip of steel to save that plywood from splintering and also smooth over the transition. So it's time to get building. First stage was to do a template taken from the transition of my ramp. I did this by marking a bit of OSB board and cutting it out, and that meant that I could offer this up onto my ramp and it'd give me the transition cut taking into account how much my coping sticked out. I ripped a bit of 2 foot wide 18mm plywood in half to give me 2 1 foot planks, and then I marked up the transition on those planks so that I could then cut that out, and that would leave me with the 2 sides of the box with the correct transition cut. I wanted to make sure that all the plywood in this project is fully painted. I'm not going to leave it outside and it's not necessarily going to stand a chance of getting wet, but it's damp in the shed and also there is a chance it could rain at any time. Next job was to cut all the 80 centimetre beams to length, and then I offered up those beams, screwed them in from the side, and that gave me the basis of my extension with all the beams screwed in. If anything, I over-engineered this, but I needed it to be nice and strong because it was going to have me bouncing up and down on it. Once all the beams were screwed in, I popped her up on top of the ramp, placed a coping block on top, and had a little stand up there to see how it felt, and oh my gosh, I could see the curvature of the earth from up there. It just felt ridiculously high. I think I'd overcooked it on the 1 foot height. So I rethought it, took it back over and trimmed off 2 inches, thus giving me a 10-inch extension. Next job was to screw on the riding surface. I used 9mm ply for this. First layer went on the front, and then I painted that all up, and then the second layer went on the front, and that needed to overlap the coping. I chose to get it to overlap the coping just enough so that when I had my 1mm metal sheet, it would overlap and fit over my existing tile effect. Again, I painted all the surfaces and then screwed that front riding surface on, and it started to look like an extension. Next job was to stick down that coping block. As a coping block sits on a sort of shelf, I could move it backwards and forwards until I had the amount of relief that I wanted the coping block to stick out the front by. I used chunky Gorilla Glue to stick the coping block down, and also the way this coping block is moulded, it's got sides that are on a bit of a wonk, which allowed me to then put other bits of wood that I cut with a chamfer, and that would hold the coping block down. The problem with fixing a coping block onto wood is it's constantly getting knocked upwards. So anytime the wheels hit that coping going upwards, it's getting suddenly jolted off of the wood. So this chamfer hold down, in conjunction with the glue, I hoped would be enough to keep it on there. So at this point the extension was structurally sound and good enough to try a first drop in. I got up there on the top, definitely looks a lot different. Going for the drop in, I noticed it was a lot whippier, and also it spat me out the other side with significantly more speed. To finish up the extension, I did a bit more painting. I did my fake tile effect on the top to match the rest of the ramp. This was simply a case of using a silver indelible marker and marking off all of those fake ground-tin bits. I also attached my strip of 1mm steel across the bottom, and this would help stop the ply splintering and also smooth that transition back into the ramp. I also added some tread plate noping to those 10cm segments either side of the coping stone. I thought this would be a good backup plan if I missed the coping block and I needed to lock into something else. Also, the tread plate texture might stop me sliding back off the edge if I did overcook a stall or a mini grind. I gave all the edges a good file down for health and safety. The last thing I'd want to do would be to catch my kingpin or my undercarriage on the edge of there. This extension is pretty heavy, and it holds itself in place by having the lip on the front, and also I cut a little bevel out of the bottom so it fits over the coping. But just as an extra safety measure, I also put a couple of brackets on the side that I could easily screw in and out between sessions. So that was the extension all finished and ready to be ridden. I couldn't wait to try out some of my favourite tricks and also see if I could get some precision stalls on that narrow coping block. Also, the increased speed from that drop in gave me the extra zip I needed to learn a couple of new tricks. Riding this extension is a whole lot of fun. It definitely ups the ante in terms of challenge to get the trick, and also ramifications should it go wrong. It was pretty scary at times and also felt pretty dangerous. There were a fair few thrills and spills, and it definitely smarted a bit more coming off from that little bit higher up. that brings us to the end of this video. Overall, I was really pleased with the way the extension worked out. That 1mm strip of steel helps to make a smooth transition up onto the extension. It makes a bit of a racket, but after a while I found I didn't even notice the transition between the normal ramp and the extension. The small width of the extension adds in a bit of proximity fear, and the fear of coming off the end is very real. So I found it really rewarding to get some of those precision stalls where the wheels lock in on that coping block, which is only just wide enough. The size of this ramp is definitely on the top end of the weight that I can manhandle on my own, but I found with the use of the skateboard, I could whip it out of the shed, get it onto the ramp, and then also get it off of the ramp back onto the skateboard and pop her away for the night. If you have any questions about my DIY extension build, leave them in the comments below. Also, feel free to hit subscribe. I make new videos every week. As ever, my name's been John Bishop, and I'm a middle-aged guy learning how to skate.